So Luke, describe to us your leadership style today.
My leadership style is about engaging with people. I think it's very important that when you're working with a team of people that you get them all engaged. So my leadership style is to actually get involved with everyone, and that means treating them as individuals. So depending on their individual personalities, whether they are extroverted and can engage in a group, or whether you've got to engage with people one-on-one, to actually bring them along the journey so we can actually get the right outcomes for the business.
So that engagement, how do you generate that engagement in your staff?
Through my personal own enthusiasm for the business, but also through working with each of the individuals. So spending time with each individual, looking at the particular responsibilities that individual has, and mentoring them, working with them, setting them goals and tasks along the way, such that at the end of the day, they are able to deliver what I need for the business.
Tell me the kind of calibre of people that you've led. Has it been large teams, small teams? Describe that for me.
Ultimately, where I've worked, I've led up to a couple of hundred people in the teams. So, direct reports vary at particular stages of my working career. I've had up to 12 direct reports, but normally about half a dozen direct reports who then lead teams themselves across a variety of aspects of the business, from HR, safety, environment, to maintenance, asset strategies and asset development, to the day-to-day operations of running facilities that I've been involved with.
Leadership isn't all about the positive side of things. Tell me how you deal with the hard conversations, the hard part of leadership.
I think the most important thing I've learned along the way with those hard conversations is to start them early. So in other words, point out to people in the least confronting fashion at the very beginning of what you see occurring that things aren't heading in the right direction, and the directions that you want the individual to actually work towards, and you sit with them and actually critique what's going on and explain to them how that is perceived by myself as the leader, but as the rest of the business perceives that person, and try and work with that person along the way. And if those things fail, then you actually then ramp up those conversations and more formalise them to the point where you actually, clear at the end of the day, you've demonstrated you've tried to work with that person, because recruiting and replacing a person is expensive. And lots of the information, lots of people in the business who have been in businesses for long periods of time have got lots of knowledge about that business that to lose them is very costly. So you try and minimise those unfortunate conversations where you've got to let someone eventually go, but you try and work your way along that path in small increments along the way.
Tell me what your employees, your subordinates, what were the words they would use to describe you as a leader?
Lots of them would just describe me as, that I'm very enthusiastic, that I express views, and I clearly show my emotions about what's going on, so that they know where I'm coming from, that I'm available and I'm regularly about the business. So when I was working in the businesses that I was working in, I would make sure that I was out on the plant floor regularly, looking at the jobs that people were doing, working into workshops where people didn't often see the management team, and sit down with the work teams and talk to them about what was going on with the business. So they would see me as a person who was highly engaging and regularly about for them to actually get involved with, and a person who actually made sure that work wasn't, even though work needs to be hard to get the right outcomes, that it wasn't a drudgery, that work was a reasonably good place to come to.
Teamwork. How do you get the most out of teams through leadership?
Well, one of the best things about working with teams and putting them together is that is putting the differences of people together and using those differences. So when you put a team together, you don't always have the perfect match for the skills that you need for the particular task that you're undertaking, whether that's a small project or whether that's an operations of a business. And what you then do is work with those people to actually grow them so that they join together as such. It's not like you actually work with the individuals, find the gaps within the team, and then use the natural skills of the various people to actually work in those gaps and work towards working together. It's really about coming together, and in the long run, that's the best thing about working with teams, is actually building them and actually building that strength and getting that unity of purpose.
Being at the top can sometimes be a lonely place. How do you deal with being the person that's in charge and making those tough decisions with everyone underneath you working potentially sometimes against you in some of the projects that you've been dealing with?
Well, one of the things about that is to have a good support network that's both sometimes within the business, your peers, and that you can actually sometimes talk to peers, or you can actually work with your supervisor and manager to actually provide some of that support that you're looking for. And sometimes there's people completely outside the business that you just need to have a chat to and provide that support. So that you can actually get that right grounding when things aren't going the right way, that they can provide you with a grounding and give you some suggestions and ideas about what you would try differently and what you might need to do and how you would view it differently to get the right outcomes.
Yeah, because you've been involved in projects, for example, when you worked in power generation, the privatisation of some of the sites, it's been a tough task to lead. You see or you know the vision down the track. You need to get everyone on board for that long-term goal, which may be a negative impact on people. How did you deal with that?
Well, one of the things about that transformation type work, where we're involved with the sale of an asset from the public sector to the private sector, and then a closure process, was to point out that there were upsides and that demonstrated that those things actually occurred. So that there were benefits in the long run, and that you were actually working with people to actually minimise the downside to individuals as a whole, and that you actually worked with people, and you could demonstrate that in terms of how you restructured the business and how you consulted with people along the way. So lots of discussions, and they started from just the direct report team, and then they filtered that out and sent that out to the site by talking to every individual, and during the various courses of that work, basically had toolbox talks with every individual on the power station site, or participated in several times their work team meetings and stuff like that, to actually give them an opportunity to ask me what was going on at the very top, and to get my views on the world directly, because sometimes the Chinese whispers and things would go astray because the messages weren't clear because they'd been passed through a couple of hands. And so one of the things I made sure was that there weren't that many hands that the messages got passed through, and that they were clear and they were provided with guidance like a toolbox talk to discuss the transformation project.
Transformation and leadership are two very difficult things to entwine. And when you talked about engagement and your passion for engagement, how do you bring people along the engagement path through transformation? Describe that again for us.
Well, one of the things with the transformation piece of work is to basically clearly demonstrate the why the business is making these decisions. And lots of people who work within businesses understand the basic inputs and outputs of the business, the basic costs of those, and how much it costs to transition a resource into a final product. They understand those costs, and when you explain to them that the transition of those costs is not market equitable, and it's not, the plant is no longer viable. Yep, they understand that, and then they will work with you to see whether they can fix that up along the way, and that's really important, to have them work with you to understand that. And ultimately, if you've got to make those really hard choices about closure, that you've been bringing people along the way. So lots of things to do with transformation are about messaging and communication, that you don't actually bring people to the end point really quickly, but you actually, as you know things that are certain, and that you can see the changes that are going on within the business and the market that it operates in, that you actually explain to those people so that they are educated at the end of the day, and they're not being faced with climbing Mount Everest in terms of information and outcomes, that you actually bring them along that journey so they get acclimatised to the fact that this change is going to occur.
In terms of leadership, do you have any mentors personally?
I have a couple of mentors that I can talk to about things, and they're both male and female that I can actually have a chat to about various things. One of the best mentors I've got is my wife. I mean, she's a strong supporter of me and my career over my working life, and she's a great sounding board. But realistically, you do need those mentors, and you need them to be long-term people who know you and know what's going on, so that when they actually see you and talk to you, they go, oh, something's going wrong, or where are you up to? And they're prepared to give you their time.
What's your thoughts on authenticity in leadership?
It's pretty quickly seen through that when you're not, authenticity, especially when in the businesses that I've been involved in, people have seen managers come and go and stuff like that, and when you're not, genuine with them, when you don't tell them the truth, when you actually, when you say you don't know, you mean you don't know, or when you say that this is the outcome, and so it's really about comms and stuff like that. You really got to talk to people and build that trust and relationship over a period of time.
So you say you've had those conversations where you've said to someone, I don't know the answer. Pride, people get, they want confidence in their staff. How do you deal with that?
Well, one of the things that in the transformation project that I've learned is two things. One is, if you don't know the answer, say you don't know the answer, and you thank them for the question, and you say, when we do know the answer to that question, I'll get back to you, and you make sure that question is answered, so that in the end, when someone asks a question that they ask, that you haven't brushed them off and said, I'll never get back to them, but you actually get back to them and answer the question when you can.
Tell me about how you like to be led.
Well, one of the things I like is I like to be engaged in leadership. I like to be engaged in the problems that I face. I like a person. I like to work with a person. My favourite tool that works a whiteboard to describe ideas and look at the broad concepts in very early draft form, and get people's input. Get your supervisor or manager's input into some of the things that they see, because sometimes they have information about what's going on in the business that they can share with you in private, and that'll help guide the decisions that you make and the strategy that you embark upon. And sometimes they can't, but in those discussions they can guide you without actually telling you outcomes and stuff like that. So I like to engage with my managers and talk about the ideas before they become crystallised.
Finally, if you were going to write a letter to 20-year-old Luke about leadership, what would be the 2 key points you'd let him know about?
If I was going to talk to the 20-year-old Luke about leadership, was that the first thing I'd talk to him about was learning about different styles of leadership, and learning more about situational leadership. Very important for Luke Welfare. As you can see, Luke Welfare is not a small human being by any stretch of the imagination. And so the quicker he learnt that, the better off he would have been. And the other thing is that don't be afraid of leadership. And if you're fearful of making a decision, and I don't think I ever have been over a working career, you'll always make the wrong one. So they're the 2 things I would tell myself.